The boy always loved traveling, even if it meant sitting for hours in a crowded airport. There was something about the hum of planes, the endless crowd of people hurrying with their luggage, and the distant sound of announcements that made him feel curious and awake. Today was no different. He walked through the terminal, his small suitcase rolling behind him, eyes wide open. He noticed little things that most adults ignored. A suitcase left just a little too far from its owner, a man fidgeting nervously, a child gripping their parent's hand tightly. His mind liked to notice these details. It made him feel like he understood the world in a way others didn't. He wasn't traveling alone. He was with his aunt, who had taken the day off to accompany him on this short trip. She was busy checking flight information on her phone, typing quickly and barely noticing the boy as he wandered slightly ahead. He didn't mind. He liked a little freedom. The boy had always been observant, even when others didn't see what he saw. His aunt's attention was on screens and schedules, but his eyes scanned the people and surroundings like a detective on a mission. As they moved closer to the gate, he noticed a plane waiting. It was a sleek silver aircraft, almost sparkling under the bright lights of the terminal. He felt a strange tug in his chest when he looked at it, almost like the plane itself was calling his attention. Something about it felt off. He couldn't say why. It was a normal plane. He had flown before and seen many planes, but today, his instincts prickled like tiny alarms ringing in his mind. He spotted a few details that didn't make sense. A man in a dark suit was hovering near the boarding line looking anxious. Another man was carrying a suitcase that seemed heavier than normal, and he kept glancing around nervously. The boy noticed the pilot walking past the gate, shaking hands with some passengers, smiling. But the pilot seemed distracted, almost uneasy. The boy felt a strange mix of curiosity and unease swirl in his chest. His aunt finally looked up from her phone. "We should go through security now," she said, grabbing his arm. The boy nodded, but his eyes didn't leave the plane. Every small movement, every anxious glance from the passengers and staff seemed to stick in his mind. There was a knot in his stomach he didn't fully understand. He had felt uneasy before during flights, but this was stronger. It wasn't fear exactly. It was a warning, subtle but insistent. At security, the line was long, moving slowly. He noticed a man in the line ahead who kept adjusting a strange-looking bag. The man looked around constantly and his hands were shaking slightly. The boy's heart started to beat faster. He tried to tell himself he was imagining things, that adults had a better sense of danger than he did. But the feeling wouldn't go away. His eyes followed the man in the bag, making mental notes, remembering small details. Finally, they reached the boarding gate. People were shuffling forward, their boarding passes ready, masks in place. The boy noticed the billionaire sitting quietly in the corner of the gate area. He didn't recognize him personally, of course, but he could tell from the way people glanced toward him that he was someone important. The billionaire was reviewing some documents, completely absorbed, unaware of the minor chaos around him. There was a calmness to him, a quiet presence that made him seem untouchable. The boy's attention shifted back to the suspicious figures near the plane. His stomach tightened further. One of the men was now talking on a phone, his voice low but tense. Every movement, every expression seemed deliberate, and his instinct screamed that something was wrong. He glanced at his aunt, debating whether to tell her, but she was busy, smiling at the gate agent, completely unaware of the boy's growing concern. Boarding began. People filed onto the plane in neat lines, rolling their suitcases and adjusting their seats. The boy stepped forward, keeping his eyes on the suspicious man with the heavy suitcase. Something inside him demanded action, but he didn't yet know what. He felt a small pang of fear. What if he was wrong? What if he overreacted? Adults didn't usually take a child's warning seriously. He took his seat near the middle of the plane, his suitcase tucked neatly under the seat in front. From here, he had a good view of the aisle and could see most of the passengers boarding. The suspicious man passed by him, placing his heavy suitcase in the overhead compartment. The boy noticed the man's hands trembling slightly as he closed the latch. The boy's heart skipped a beat. He clenched his fists under the seat, trying to steady himself. The flight attendants began their routine, welcoming passengers and giving safety instructions. The boy listened, but his mind wandered, replaying the strange observations he had made earlier. He thought about the fidgety man, the heavy suitcase, the anxious behavior, and the subtle signs that didn't fit together. Something wasn't right, and the boy knew it instinctively. The billionaire was boarding quietly, slipping past most of the passengers unnoticed. The boy caught a glimpse of him, noticing how calm and focused he looked, completely absorbed in his papers. For a moment, the boy felt a strange connection, like the important man sitting there didn't even realize he might need protection from something the boy was sensing already. The plane filled quickly. Flight attendants moved up and down the aisle, helping passengers with bags, answering questions, and checking seats. The boy's unease grew as he noticed more small things. A faint clicking sound came from one of the overhead compartments. A passenger near the back seemed overly nervous, adjusting his jacket repeatedly. Even the pilot's voice over the intercom sounded slightly strained, though the announcement was calm and polite. Finally, everyone was seated, the doors closed, and the plane began taxiing. The engines roared to life, vibrating beneath the boy's seat. He gripped the armrests, his mind racing with questions and possibilities. He tried to convince himself it was nothing, but deep down, he knew it wasn't. Something was about to happen, something serious, and he had to figure out what to do. As the plane moved down the runway, the boy's instincts sharpened. Every glance, every sound, every small movement seemed significant. He thought about the heavy suitcase, the nervous man, and the pilot's slight unease. He thought about the passengers around him, unaware, chatting, reading, adjusting their screens. And then he realized that if he didn't act soon, whatever danger he sensed might become real. The boy took a deep breath. He didn't know exactly how he would do it, but he felt a sudden determination. He had to speak up. He had to warn someone, even if no one believed him. He knew adults often dismissed children, but he couldn't ignore what he saw and felt. His heart pounded in his chest. He watched the flight attendants moving past, ready to step in if he spoke, hoping someone would listen before it was too late. As the plane gained speed and lifted off the ground, a small voice inside him grew louder, demanding action. The boy clenched his fists, staring out the window for a moment, then back at the aisle. He saw the anxious man adjusting his bag again, and something in the man's expression confirmed the boy's fears. He couldn't wait any longer. He had to act. He opened his mouth, ready to speak, and the words that had been building inside him for hours finally burst out. The plane is sabotaged," he screamed, his voice trembling but strong. Passengers turned in shock. Flight attendants froze for a moment. The pilot's calm voice over the intercom faltered slightly. The boy didn't care. He only cared about making sure someone knew, about stopping whatever danger was coming. He sat up straight, determined, hoping anyone would take him seriously. And in that moment, everything changed. The ordinary flight, the ordinary day was no longer ordinary. The boy had chosen courage over fear. Whatever happened next, he knew he had done the right thing. The boy's words echoed through the cabin, and for a moment, everything froze. Passengers stared at him in shock, some mouths hanging open, others gripping their armrests tightly. Flight attendants quickly turned toward him, their professional calm battling the sudden tension. The boy's chest heaved as he tried to keep speaking, but fear and urgency made his voice tremble. I saw something. The plane. It's going to be in danger," he shouted, pointing toward the aisle. A few passengers muttered under their breath, shaking their heads. "It's just a child," one whispered to a neighbor. "He doesn't know what he's talking about." The boy heard them, but he didn't let it stop him. His instincts screamed that there was no time to wait. He had to make them understand. One flight attendant, a tall woman with a serious expression, bent down slightly and asked, "What do you mean, young man? What is going on?" The boy swallowed hard, trying to explain what he had seen and felt. I saw a man with a bag that was wrong. He kept acting nervous, and something inside me told me something bad was going to happen." He paused, realizing how strange it must sound. He was a kid, talking about danger on a plane, but he refused to back down. Meanwhile, the man with the heavy suitcase shifted in his seat, pretending to adjust himself. His nervous movements didn't go unnoticed. A few passengers glanced at him suspiciously, sensing the boy's fear might not be imaginary. The billionaire, seated quietly a few rows away, raised an eyebrow, noticing the boy's urgency. Something about the way the boy spoke and the look in his eyes made him pay attention. He didn't know why yet, but he sensed the boy's warning could be real. The flight attendants moved quickly, trying to calm the passengers while listening to the boy. They exchanged brief whispers, one moving toward the cockpit to alert the pilot. The boy's heart raced as he realized that even if some adults doubted him, others were starting to take action. The small sense of relief gave him a little strength to keep explaining. "I'm not lying," the boy said loudly. "Please check the plane. Something bad is here." His words hung in the air like a bell ringing loudly in a quiet room. Some passengers started murmuring nervously, glancing around as if the entire plane had shifted from normal to dangerous in an instant. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm but firm. "Attention all passengers, we are experiencing a minor security alert. Please remain seated. Flight attendants, check all overhead compartments and luggage. Safety is our top priority." The boy felt a small spark of hope. They were listening. Maybe, just maybe, his warning would prevent something terrible from happening. He watched as flight attendants began moving carefully down the aisle, checking bags and talking quietly into their radios. The anxious man in the heavy suitcase seat tensed, shifting his weight uncomfortably. He glanced nervously around the cabin, realizing something was happening that he hadn't anticipated. Passengers whispered among themselves. Some were still skeptical. "It's probably nothing," one said, trying to calm a friend who was clutching their armrest tightly. But a few others couldn't ignore the boy's urgency. The way he stood, pointing, speaking with sincerity despite being small and scared, it made them think twice. The billionaire finally spoke quietly to the person next to him. "Listen," he said, his voice steady. "There's something about that boy. He seems to know what he's talking about. Keep an eye on him." He leaned forward slightly, observing the boy's actions, the determination on his face. Something inside him told him that this child was more aware than most adults could be in this moment. Meanwhile, the boy felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him. He was a kid, yes, but right now he wasn't thinking about age. He was thinking about safety. Every second mattered. Every movement counted. He tried to remember every detail. The fidgety man, the heavy bag, the nervous looks, the small behaviors that adults might dismiss. He had to make sure the crew didn't miss anything. The flight attendants worked quickly and efficiently, checking the overhead compartments, talking quietly into their radios. The boy followed them with his eyes, pointing subtly whenever he noticed something unusual. "There, that bag," he whispered to the attendant passing by. Pointing toward a suitcase that had been placed slightly off-center, the attendant nodded, checking the bag carefully. A tense hush fell over the plane. Passengers could feel that something serious was happening. The normal chatter, the rustle of magazines, the beep of screens, it all seemed to fade away. Every eye turned to the boy at some point, wondering why such a small voice could create such big movement. The boy kept explaining everything he remembered, trying to be clear and precise. The anxious man in the aisle seat realized the situation was slipping out of his control. He shifted, tried to act casual, but the tension in his posture betrayed him. A flight attendant gave him a polite but firm request to show what was inside his bag. He hesitated, his heart pounding, and fumbled with the zipper. The boy's instincts screamed, this was it. This was the moment that could confirm everything he had feared. The billionaire leaned slightly forward in his seat again, noticing how the crew was reacting. He could see the fear and determination in the boy's eyes. He could see the subtle movements of the nervous man. The pieces were coming together. He realized that this child might have prevented something serious, something no one else had noticed yet. The flight attendants worked efficiently, checking each detail with care. The boy's voice grew stronger as he spoke, no longer trembling as much. He pointed out small things, a strange device sticking out of a bag, unusual movements from a passenger, little inconsistencies that adults might have overlooked. His confidence grew as he realized that people were taking him seriously. Passengers began to shift in their seats, some whispering about the bravery of the boy, some still skeptical but watching carefully. The tension was thick, but it wasn't chaos. People were listening, waiting, watching. The boy realized that sometimes adults needed a child's voice to notice what they themselves could not see. The anxious man's expression changed from nervousness to panic as he realized the crew was focused on him. He tried to act casual, but his movements betrayed him. The boy watched, feeling both fear and hope. He had done what he could. Now it was up to the adults around him to act. The pilot's voice came over the intercom again, firm and clear. All crew follow safety procedures. Passengers remain seated. Attention to all luggage and compartments immediately. The boy felt a surge of relief. He had been heard. His warning had reached the right people. The billionaire, still quietly observing, leaned back in his seat slightly. He didn't know yet what had been happening behind the scenes, but he could sense the gravity of the situation. This child had noticed something critical that could have been missed. The calm but focused way the boy had spoken, the courage it took, it made him pay attention more than anyone else. As the flight attendants worked methodically, the boy began to calm slightly. The danger was not gone yet, but action was being taken. He realized that sometimes courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about acting even when you were afraid. That was what he had done. That was what mattered. The passengers, initially doubtful, began to sense that the situation was serious. Some whispered encouragement to the boy, some silently thanked him in their hearts, and a few looked at the anxious man with suspicion. The energy in the plane had shifted from disbelief to cautious attention. The boy continued to point out small details, describing what he had seen and felt earlier in the terminal and on the plane. His memory for small details was sharp, and the crew listened, cross-checking everything carefully. He realized that sometimes the smallest voice could make the biggest difference. Finally, one flight attendant approached him directly. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice serious. "You may have prevented something very dangerous. Stay seated and remain calm. We are taking care of this." The boy nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and tension. Relief that someone believed him. Tension because the danger was still real and present. The anxious man's bag was being inspected thoroughly now, and the boy watched every movement. His instincts were screaming that something was about to be revealed. Something important that could change everything. He didn't look away. He couldn't. He had already done his part by speaking up. Now he had to watch as the adults did theirs. Time seemed to stretch. The boy could hear the faint hum of the engines, the careful movements of the crew, and the whispered conversations of passengers around him. He realized that every second mattered. Every detail could make the difference between safety and disaster. His heart pounded, but his mind remained focused, and then finally something happened. A subtle sound, a small movement, something unusual in the bag that the anxious man had tried to hide. The boy's instincts were correct. He had known it. He had seen it before anyone else did. And in that moment, he realized that his courage, his observation, and his voice had made all the difference. The boy watched closely as the flight attendants worked, checking every bag and scanning the cabin with careful eyes. The anxious man's suitcase was finally being opened. His hands trembled as he tried to act normal, but his effort was meaningless. Every movement the man made seemed to shout danger, and the boy's heart pounded faster. He knew without a doubt that this was the moment that mattered. Passengers were whispering nervously among themselves. Some still doubted, but many were beginning to sense that something serious was happening. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted from normal chatter to tense alertness. The boy felt a mix of fear and hope. Fear because he knew what could happen if no one stopped it, and hope because now the adults were finally taking action. The flight attendant carefully unzipped the heavy suitcase. Inside there was something that made everyone's stomach tighten. A mechanical device, wires coiled together, and a timer that was ticking steadily. The crew exchanged serious glances, and a murmur ran through the passengers. The boy felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He had seen it, had sensed something was wrong, and now the danger was clear. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm but urgent. "Attention all passengers, we have discovered a potential threat. Please remain calm and seated. Flight attendants follow emergency protocols immediately." The boy felt his heart leap. They had found it. They had discovered the danger because he had spoken up. The anxious man tried to protest, to claim that it was nothing, but the flight attendants held him firmly. His face turned pale. He realized that the careful plan he had made had completely failed. The boy's words, his courage, had changed everything. He had stopped what could have been a tragedy. The billionaire, still seated quietly, watched the scene unfold. He didn't move at first, but his eyes followed the boy. He realized how brave this young boy had been. Most adults might have ignored a child, dismissed his warning as imagination, but this boy had acted, had spoken, and had prevented danger that could have harmed everyone on the plane. The billionaire felt a surge of respect and gratitude for the boy, even though they had never spoken before. Passengers were whispering in low voices, Some were amazed that a child had noticed something the adults had missed. Some were relieved that the threat had been discovered before disaster could strike. The boy sat up straighter in his seat, watching carefully as the crew secured the device and restrained the anxious man. Every movement reassured him that his courage had mattered. The flight attendants moved quickly, securing the suspicious object and following every safety protocol. The boy's nerves were still tight, but he could feel a small sense of accomplishment. He had spoken up, even when others didn't believe him. He had taken responsibility in a moment of fear and uncertainty, and now he could see the results. The pilot spoke again, his voice calm and steady. "Thanks to the alertness of a young passenger, we have neutralized a potential threat. All passengers are safe." A collective sigh of relief ran through the cabin. Some passengers clapped softly, some whispered words of thanks to the boy, and a few looked at him with admiration. The boy felt a mixture of relief and pride. He hadn't done this for recognition. He had done it because he knew something was wrong and he couldn't ignore it. Now, seeing that his actions had made a real difference, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had helped prevent something terrible, and that was more important than anything else. The anxious man was now under control. The crew ensured that he could not cause harm. Passengers slowly began to relax, though their eyes still flicked around nervously. The boy noticed small smiles, subtle nods, and whispers of gratitude directed toward him. Even the billionaire finally stood and approached quietly, giving the boy a respectful nod. The boy didn't fully understand it, but he could sense the weight of the moment, the gravity of what had been avoided. The boy looked around the cabin, noticing the passengers who were still a little shaken. He realized that even though people might not fully understand what he had seen or felt, his courage had given them safety. That thought made his heart feel lighter. For a moment, he could almost forget the fear that had driven him to speak out in the first place. The billionaire finally spoke to the boy in a calm, quiet voice. "You were very brave," he said. "Most people wouldn't have noticed what you did. You paid attention, you acted, and you saved lives. That is extraordinary." The boy blinked, a little surprised by the compliment. He hadn't expected recognition, but hearing it from someone so important felt strange and comforting at the same time. The flight attendants were busy reassuring passengers, helping them adjust after the tense moments. Some offered water, some spoke quietly to calm nerves, and the boy watched, feeling proud to have played a part in restoring safety. He thought about how important it was to speak up, even when others might not believe you, and he realized that courage often came in small but powerful acts. The plane continued to fly smoothly now. The engines hummed calmly and the tension began to fade. Passengers whispered about what had just happened, sharing their relief and gratitude. The boy leaned back in his seat, still alert but beginning to relax. He knew that the danger was gone, and that his actions had mattered more than he could have imagined. The billionaire returned to his seat, glancing once more at the boy. He didn't need words. The look in his eyes conveyed thanks, respect, and understanding. The boy felt a small smile creep across his face. He had done something important, something that truly mattered. And it had changed the lives of everyone on that plane. Even as the boy tried to calm himself, he couldn't stop thinking about what had almost happened. The fear, the tension, the uncertainty. It all made him more aware of how quickly things could go wrong and how important it was to stay alert. But he also felt a quiet confidence growing inside him. He had faced fear, spoken out, and seen the result of his courage. Passengers began to relax more fully, chatting quietly, some smiling at the boy as they passed by him in the aisle. The flight attendants gave him small nods of approval, and the pilot's calm demeanor returned over the intercom. "Thank you for your patience, everyone. We will continue our flight safely." The boy felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He looked out the window, watching the clouds pass by, the sun casting warm light over the horizon. He thought about how quickly a day could change, how ordinary moments could become extraordinary with courage and awareness. He realized that even a small voice, when spoken with honesty and bravery, could make an enormous difference. The boy thought about the passengers, the crew, and even the billionaire. He felt connected to them all, knowing that something he did had saved lives. He had acted when others might have hesitated, and now he could see the real impact of his courage. That realization made him feel both proud and humble at the same time. The plane flew on smoothly, the tension fading, but the lesson stayed with him. Courage, awareness, and speaking out when something feels wrong could truly change lives. He had learned that in a single, unforgettable moment, his actions had mattered more than anything else. Even as the boy closed his eyes for a brief moment of rest, he remained alert, remembering every detail, every sound, every small movement that had led him to act. He knew that life was fragile, and that paying attention, noticing details, and acting with bravery could sometimes make the difference between tragedy and safety. And in that quiet moment, high above the clouds, the boy realized something profound. Even though he was young, his actions had weight. Even though the world sometimes ignored the voices of children, speaking up could save lives. And in that moment, he felt a calm certainty that he had done exactly what he was meant to do. The boy sat quietly, still absorbing everything that had just happened. The plane hummed smoothly as it flew above the clouds, and the tension in the cabin had mostly disappeared. Passengers were talking softly, some still shaking their heads in disbelief, others smiling in relief. The boy's chest still felt tight from adrenaline, but he was calmer now. He realized that what he had done, the courage he had shown, had truly made a difference. The billionaire, seated a few rows ahead, turned and gave the boy a small nod, his eyes filled with gratitude. The boy looked back, feeling a strange warmth. It was more than just a nod. It was acknowledgement, respect, and appreciation all in one. He had never expected recognition, but in that moment, he understood that courage often does not go unnoticed, even if it doesn't come with applause. Flight attendants moved quietly through the cabin, checking on passengers, offering water, and helping anyone who still seemed nervous. The boy noticed their subtle smiles when they passed by him. He realized that they had seen his bravery too. Their nods, their glances, even the careful way they continued their work. It all told him that his actions mattered. He had spoken up, and now people were safer because of it. Passengers began to talk quietly among themselves, sharing what they had experienced. Some whispered about the boy's courage, some shared relief at being alive, and a few reflected on how fragile life could be. The boy listened to these conversations, feeling a mix of pride and humility. He had acted out of instinct and fear, but seeing the impact of his words made him understand the weight of responsibility. The billionaire finally approached him during a calm moment. "You have an extraordinary gift," he said softly, his voice steady and kind. "Most people would have ignored a child. You didn't. You acted when it mattered the most, and you saved lives. That is remarkable." The boy blinked, surprised at the praise. He had not done it for recognition, but hearing these words made him feel seen, truly seen, in a way he had never felt before. The boy's aunt, who had been watching the events unfold, finally reached his side. She had been nervous, scared, and uncertain throughout the ordeal, but now her expression softened. "You were so brave," she whispered, hugging him tightly. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't spoken up." The boy felt the warmth of her embrace, the comfort of knowing that even if others doubted him, the people who loved him believed in him completely. As the plane continued its flight, the crew ensured that everything was secure. The anxious man who had caused the threat was under control and would be handled by authorities after landing. The passengers were slowly settling down, adjusting back to normalcy, though their eyes still reflected the tension they had felt just minutes ago. The boy observed it all, realizing how close they had come to a disaster and how his courage had changed the outcome. The billionaire returned to his seat, but not before looking once more at the boy. "I hope you understand," he said quietly, "that bravery like yours is rare. You made a difference today that none of us will forget." The boy felt a quiet pride swell inside him. He had done what felt impossible. He had spoken up, stood firm, and his voice had mattered more than he ever imagined. The plane flew on, higher above the clouds, and the boy found himself thinking about what had just happened. Fear, tension, and responsibility had guided his actions. But he realized something important. Courage isn't about not being afraid. Courage is about acting even when fear is there. That thought stayed with him, comforting and empowering him at the same time. He looked around the cabin at the passengers. Some smiled at him quietly, some whispered words of thanks, and a few even offered small nods of admiration. He realized that courage has ripple effects. One action, one brave decision can touch the lives of many people, even if the world doesn't always notice immediately. The boy's thoughts drifted back to the moment he had shouted out the warning. his voice trembling but firm. He remembered the looks of shock, the initial disbelief, and then the gradual realization as adults acted. He thought about how strange and powerful it was that a small voice could create such a big impact. It made him feel stronger, more confident, and more aware of the importance of listening to one's instincts. The plane continued smoothly, and the sunlight poured through the windows, casting warm golden light over the cabin. It felt calm now, but the boy knew that life could change in an instant. He had learned firsthand how important it was to pay attention, to act when something felt wrong, and to trust his instincts. Those lessons, he realized, would stay with him forever. Passengers began preparing for landing. The nervousness that had gripped them earlier had faded into cautious relief. The boy watched them, understanding the invisible threads that connected all of them. The shared experience, the relief of safety, and the gratitude for the courage that had made it all possible. He felt proud, not because of recognition, but because he had acted correctly when it mattered the most. The billionaire, preparing to leave his seat as the plane descended, approached the boy one last time. "Remember this day," he said quietly, "because it shows what can happen when someone chooses to act rather than remain silent. You have a rare gift, don't ever lose it." The boy nodded, feeling the weight of the words. They weren't just praise. They were a reminder of responsibility, of bravery, and of the impact one person can have. The plane touched down smoothly. Passengers clapped softly, not just for the safe landing, but for the courage and quick action that had made it possible. The boy felt a small smile form on his lips as he watched everyone disembark, still whispering about what had happened. He realized that courage, honesty, and awareness are what truly make a difference in the world. As he stepped off the plane with his aunt, the boy took a deep breath. The world outside the airport seemed the same, but he knew that he had changed. His voice, his courage, his quick thinking had saved lives. And in that realization, he felt a quiet, powerful confidence that would stay with him forever. The boy looked back at the plane, now just a shining metal shape in the distance. He thought about the passengers, the crew, the billionaire, and how one small action could ripple outward to touch many lives. He understood now that bravery wasn't about being the strongest or the oldest. It was about standing up, speaking out, and trusting your instincts when it truly mattered. Even as the crowd moved around him, he felt a quiet pride and calm determination. He knew that the world could be unpredictable, but he also knew that courage, even in the smallest form, could change everything. And in that moment, the boy smiled, ready to face whatever challenges came next, carrying the lessons of today deep inside him. He walked through the airport with his aunt, surrounded by people still processing the event, feeling stronger, more aware, and more certain than ever that one person, even a child, could make a difference. And somewhere in the crowd, the billionaire quietly observed him again, knowing that this young boy had not only saved lives but also reminded everyone of the power of courage and action. As they exited the terminal, the boy looked up at the sky, thinking about the planes above, the clouds, and the endless possibilities ahead. He knew one thing for certain: bravery wasn't about being fearless. It was about acting, speaking, and standing firm, even when no one else believed you. And today, he had done exactly that.